Hello, my little loves. Tonight we're going to read Chapter 13 of the Double Trouble Society. If you remember, in Chapter 12, we found out that Ivy and Maggie might have a little bit of magic in them. So now we're going to read Chapter 13, Taking Flight. All of a sudden, the crows stopped flapping, flew through the air, and dropped Maggie several meters down on the ground with a loud thud. Maggie muttered about squished biscuits and being covered in bruises, got to her feet, and looked around. She was in a stone cave where a small green fire burned in the darkness. Its green light softly illuminated the walls of the cave, and Maggie noticed another light bouncing off them too, something warmer and more purple. It was only when a strand of hair flopped into her eyes that she realized it was her purple hair glowing wildly in the dark. "Cool," she said with a grin. It was blindingly bright, so she brushed it out of her face and moved forward, using it to light her way as she looked for a way out. The chill of the air set into her bones quickly, however, and her teeth chattered with fear and cold as she followed the sound of the gusty wind outside. It stirred her purple hair into a wild dance, and the closer she fumbled in the dark towards what she hoped was the opening of the cave, the louder the noise grew. It was a cackling that echoed around the stone walls and made her skin prickle and the hairs on her arms and her neck stand on end. Each step she took was more nervous than the last, her legs wobbly and her knees knocked together. Then she saw her, the Crowwood Witch, up close and in the flesh. Emerald had her back to Maggie. She was still in the same black fur dress she had worn after her transition from her cat body, and her long black hair twisted through the air like snakes snapping at their prey. The witch waved her arms around her head, her bony fingers glowing green, and every few moments she shot sparks up in the sky that exploded into the smoke like fireworks. The smell of dead grass and rotting leaves got stronger with each explosion, and the witch's laugh grew louder and more maniacal. Maggie crept out of the cave and walked over to the edge of the mountain. The drop made her stomach turn, but she looked down at the village below, smaller than she'd ever seen it, and the thought of Ivy and how scared she must be. "Don't worry, Ivy. We'll defeat this wicked witch somehow," she muttered to herself. Then abruptly, the cackling ceased. The witch whipped her head round and glared at Maggie with her shining black eyes. Her skin was so very pale, just like amethyst, but her lips were thin and her face was sharp and unkind, although still fascinating in an unnerving and deeply unapproachable way. "Wicked? Did you just call me wicked?" the witch hissed. Maggie thought her voice sounded like a cat when it spat. "Yes, I suppose that's a good way to describe me. I'm glad you're here, Maggie dear. I actually wanted to thank you." The thank me?" Maggie's bottom lip began to wobble, and she bit her cheek to keep from crying in front of the witch. "Yes," the witch purred. "You broke the dozen circle. You told me the spell was broken. If it wasn't for you, I'd still be trapped as a cat, completely powerless. You are responsible for the despair and destruction about to rain down on the world, the most vicious storm your poor little humans have ever seen." "That's not true." Maggie felt a tear slide down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. "This isn't my fault." "Children are always to blame," Emerald snapped. "Every single one of the little nuisances. That's why I plan to get rid of you all." She licked the back of her hand and smoothed down her hair with it. What? Maggie stuttered. "Oh, yes. Do you really think I would stop at just the 13th? Why on earth would I do that when I could eat the heart of every child in the entire world and live until the end of time?" A scratch of triumph burst out of the witch, and she raised her palms to the swirling smoke cloud above them and the green cackling lightning, showering sparks down around them that singed Maggie's purple hair. "All right. Maybe all the hearts in the world might be a little much for me. My servants, the adults I choose to take with me, will do my bidding. Eat a heart each so they can be by my side for longer. I'm sure your father, for instance, wouldn't mind adding a few more years to his life, would he not?" My father would never eat a heart of a child. Maggie felt anger build inside her. How dare the witch speak of her father like that? My father is a good man. Maggie could feel the rage bubbling in her stomach like a potion in a storybook cauldron. Your father? The witch hissed with her black eyes black as coal. Will do whatever I tell him to. Her lips thinned, turned up at the corners into something Maggie wasn't able to call a smile. Smiles are meant to make you feel warm and loved, but Emerald's smile made Maggie shudder and feel very, very afraid. He's under a spell so deep, so dark, it'll be a wonder if he ever wakes from it. If I tell him to eat a heart, he will eat one, even if it's yours or your friend's. I must say, I have really outdone myself this time. Emerald turned her eyes towards the sky and looked up at the enormous cloud of smoke that glistened green in the light of the moon. There isn't a single witch alive who could counter this spell. I'm afraid you and your little playmates are doomed. The witch began to shake with laughter. She bent double and screeched and howled, her hands beginning to glow green again and shoot sparks upward into the smoke. You won't get away with this, Maggie yelled. Amethyst will find a way to stop you. She did last time and she will this time too. She's 1,000 times the witch you'll ever be. But Emerald didn't hear her over her own shrill laughter and the sound of her evil magic shooting upwards like exploding fireworks. Maggie could feel the rage in her stomach spread through her body like wildfire. It was hot and potent, and suddenly she stomped her foot against the rock of the mountain as hard as she could. A purple bolt of lightning shot from the sole of her slipper, burning the bottom of it clean off. The bolt of lightning cracked the rock at her feet, then ran all the way from her to the bare, clawed feet of the evil witch. Emerald yelped and hopped backwards as the lightning burned the ends of her toes. Then her expression changed from wicked delight to pure, unbridled malice. Maggie has magic, huh? My sister's up to her usual tricks, huh? Well, let's see how well she taught you then, shall we? The witch raised her glowing hands in front of her, ready to blast Maggie with a spell to send her hurtling off the mountain, but a low, rumbling sound made her stop in her tracks. Suddenly, the sound became deafening, and Maggie's heart plummeted to the bottom of the mountain. Was she going to end up there, too, at any moment? The lightning bolt had separated the chunk of rock she was standing on from the rest of the mountain, and that chunk was now crumbling away and taking Maggie with it. The witch laughed and waved goodbye to Maggie as Maggie began to tumble downward towards the ground below. Maggie let out a scream of terror as she continued to fall. Help! She shrieked and clenched her eyes shut tight. Fear shot through her body like anger she had just felt before creating the lightning bolt. But then she felt a warm feeling suddenly rush through her veins. The glow reached her fingertips and her toes and the top of her head. Suddenly she realized the wind was no longer rushing towards her, and she was no longer falling towards the ground. When she opened her eyes, she realized that she was actually moving upwards and away from the untimely death. She was flying. Her whole body was aglow with a purple hue, and as triumph flushed through her, the glow got even brighter. Maggie rose through the air and back up to the witch, who looked ever so displeased with her. How have you done this? Emerald howled. This time it was Maggie's turn to laugh. She poked her tongue out at the witch, and before Emerald could respond with a spell that would turn her into a toad, Maggie flew away as fast as she could. Amethyst's magic had drained away when the crows had taken Maggie, but it was back now. Maggie was flying. It was something she'd only ever been able to do in her dreams, and who knew how long it might last. She was wobbly at first, but soon enough she was swirling through the air like she'd been born with wings. Yahoo! Maggie yelled in the sky and thought she was Peter Pan shooting through the air, leaving a trail of pixie dust behind him. But she didn't need pixie dust. The magic was rushing through her veins. This was the closest magic Maggie had ever been to the stars, and seeing them shine that bright, that little bit brighter, sent tingles up her whole body. She tried a loop-de-loop, which was a little lopsided, but she giggled the whole way round. The village looked miniature below, the parked cars the size of ants, and Maggie didn't want her feet to touch the ground again. Flying made her feel alive and free, and as if no worry or problem could ever be that bad, not from these dizzying heights. She let out a burst of laughter, and with it a burst of purple light lit up the sky around her. She may have just figured out flying and worked out how to navigate her way home, but landing was proving tricky. After a few failed attempts, she finally hit the grass with a less than grateful thud, adding a few more bruises to her collection. This wouldn't have been embarrassing had Amethyst, Ivy, and all the children of Crowwood Peak not been out in front of the lawn of Hokum House waiting for her. They cheered and clapped as she thumped to the ground. She suddenly felt exhausted, and Ivy ran to her with open arms. "I'm so glad you're okay," Ivy yelled in Maggie's ear, hugging her so tightly she almost knocked the breath out of her. "I really thought the witch was going to burn you to a cinder with a single blast of her magic. But you really showed her. You won't get away with this." Ivy mimicked the words Maggie had spoken to the witch on the mountain. She was out of breath with excitement of it all. "How do you know what I said?" Maggie croaked as Ivy finally let her go. Let's just say we won't be needing our walkie-talkies anymore," Ivy said, and then laughed even harder when Maggie's face scrunched up in confusion. Ivy concentrated as hard as she could on pushing her thoughts into Maggie's mind. Without speaking out loud, Ivy said, "Come in, Maggie. I repeat, come in, Maggie. Over." Maggie's eyes grew wide and round as she heard Ivy's voice loud and clear in her own head. Without seeing her lips moving, "Whoa," she said in amazement. "How did you do that? Teach me." "Only if you teach me to fly," Ivy exclaimed. "How did you know our hair glows in the dark too?" Maggie said. "What? I knew it was bright, but it's actually phosphorescent?" "Yeah, it's phosphorescent," Maggie agreed, and Ivy laughed. "No, phosphorescent. It means glow in the dark." "Okay, you two, there will be time for this later, but right now we have bigger fish to fry. Or rather, a bigger witch to defeat." Amethyst pointed towards the mountain where Emerald was putting on a very frightening and extremely smoky light show of spells. "Wow, you must have really annoyed her," Ivy said. "Yeah, she definitely did not expect me to fly. The look on her face would have been funny if it hadn't been so terrifying." "So you heard everything the witch was saying too?" "Sort of. I could only hear what was in your head, so your words were louder than hers. But we got the gist," Ivy said sadly. "Emerald plans to erase children by putting a spell on every adult on Earth. The adults will live forever by eating the hearts of children, and every child will be wiped off for good." Maggie explained to everyone, trying to keep the wobble out of her voice. "No," Eddie gasped. "My mom couldn't. You've got to be wrong," Jamie said, sounding frightened. "My dad would never." "Well, I believe you. So what do we do?" Isaac asked with a tremble in his voice. He was still clutching his jar of gunk. "Yeah, what's the plan?" asked Jennifer. "They don't have one," Jemima scoffed from the doorway of Hokum House, reluctant to get close enough in case she seemed like part of the team. "They're making it up as they go along." "Yes, we are," Amethyst confirmed. "I'm not pretending to have this figured out. If I've given anyone the impression I know what I'm doing, I'm truly sorry, because I don't." Amethyst spoke to everyone as a group, trying hard not to acknowledge Jemima's negative attitude. "But that doesn't mean we won't figure this out together, or that my sister won't be defeated. I believe we can do this, but not if we don't all believe we can, or if we aren't willing to try." The group nodded and made agreeing noises, but Jemima just rolled her eyes. She didn't complain, though, and Amethyst took this as a small win. "Right, everyone, it's late. Let's try to get some sleep, because I fear tomorrow might bring with it new horrors that we can't imagine." Amethyst sighed and ushered everyone back in the house, except for Maggie and Ivy. "Just a minute, you two." Maggie was mid-yawn, her mouth stretching wide open as wide open as it can go, and Ivy blinked slowly, already feeling sleepy. Sleep began to creep over her. "I need your help. This house is without any protection, and although I don't think Emerald will attack tonight, I still think it would be wise to put some spells in this place." We don't know how to do any protection spells, Amethyst, Ivy said, catching Maggie's yawn. No, but I do. I need you to boost my magic. Take my hands. Maggie and Ivy stood on either side of Amethyst and sleepily took her hands. Now, I need you to imagine how you would feel if someone was trying to hurt anyone you loved. I don't want to think about that, Maggie said. I need you to, but only for a moment, because then I need you to imagine yourself protecting them. Imagine how it feels to be strong and brave and enough to stop anything from hurting people that you love and the things that you love the most. Imagine feeling unstoppable, invincible even. Let that feeling fill you up and then let it spill out and across this house and everyone inside it. That kind of love is real magic. It's what keeps people safe. Amethyst held on to their hands as tightly as she could, and they both squeezed back. Even Jemima, Ivy said huffily. Even Jemima, Amethyst nodded with a small smile. Fine, Ivy sighed, and then closed her eyes to concentrate. Together, Ivy and Maggie imagined themselves as a united force. They imagined the witch coming to turn their dads into heart-eating monsters, but they also imagined themselves as capable of stopping her. They imagined themselves being filled with powerful, good magic, strong enough to blast the wicked witch out of existence and back to the demon her aunt had bargained with 300 years ago. Then they pictured themselves as the saviors of Crowwood Peak and the village holding a festival to celebrate their victory. As they imagined this, a purple light shone out of their hearts and shimmered across the entire house, wrapping it in a warm hug that would keep everyone safe and sound for at least one more night. As they went back inside, the milky white moon above them shone down on the house. Tomorrow, it would be a blue moon. And that is the end of chapter 13. That was a good one. Come back tomorrow night and we'll read yet another one. Sweet dreams.